In the sleepy town of Ravenswood, nestled in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, a mysterious outbreak occurred. It started with a few scattered reports of violent attacks, but within days, the town was overrun with the undead. Emily Mayfield, a 27-year-old nurse, found herself at the forefront of the chaos. She had been working the night shift at Ravenswood General Hospital when the first patients began arriving, their bodies ravaged by the mysterious virus. As the night wore on, Emily watched in horror as the patients deteriorated, their eyes turning a milky white, their skin gray and decaying. And then, they rose from their beds, their eyes snapping open with an unnatural hunger. Emily knew she had to act fast. She grabbed a nearby fire extinguisher and made a run for the door. But as she burst through the hospital's front entrance, she was met with a sight that made her blood run cold. The streets were filled with the undead, their moans and groans echoing through the night air. Emily knew she had to find a safe place to hide, and fast. She spotted a nearby police cruiser and made a dash for it. As she jumped inside, she locked the doors and started the engine. But as she looked in the rearview mirror, she saw a horde of zombies shambling towards her. Emily put the car in gear and hit the gas, speeding away from the hospital as fast as she could. But as she navigated the winding streets of Ravenswood, she knew she couldn't outrun the zombies forever. She needed a plan, and fast. That's when she remembered the old abandoned mine on the outskirts of town. It was the perfect place to hide, at least for a while. As Emily sped towards the mine, she could feel the zombies closing in. She floored it, the cruiser's tires screeching as she took the final turn into the mine's entrance. She skidded to a stop, grabbing her bag and jumping out of the car. As she looked back, she saw the zombies pouring into the mine's entrance, their eyes fixed on her. Emily took off in a sprint, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew she had to find a safe place to hide, and fast. As she ran deeper into the mine, the darkness seemed to close in around her. She stumbled, her foot catching on a loose rock. And then, she heard it. The sound of footsteps, echoing off the mine's walls. Emily's heart sank. She wasn't alone. She scrambled to her feet, grabbing a nearby pickaxe. As she turned to face the darkness, she saw a figure emerging from the shadows. It was a young man, his eyes wild and his skin smeared with dirt. Emily raised the pickaxe, ready to strike. But as she looked into the man's eyes, she saw something there that gave her pause. It was a spark of humanity, a glimmer of hope. "Please," the man said, his voice shaking. "Don't hurt me. I'm not one of them." Emily hesitated, the pickaxe still raised. And then, she slowly lowered it. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man took a step forward, his eyes locked on Emily's. "My name is Jake," he said, "and I think we're the only survivors left in Ravenswood." As Emily looked at Jake, she knew that she had found an ally in the fight against the undead. Together, they would have to navigate the treacherous landscape of Ravenswood, fighting to stay alive in a world gone mad. But as they stood there, the darkness closing in around them, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. That the zombies were waiting for them, patiently, in the shadows. And then, without warning, the lights flickered and died. Emily and Jake were plunged into darkness, the only sound the creaking of the old mine's wooden beams. They were trapped, alone and defenseless in the depths of the mine. And as they waited for the zombies to come for them, Emily knew that their chances of survival were slim to none. The mine was a tomb, and they were the only living souls left to bury. But Emily refused to give up. She knew that as long as she and Jake were alive, there was hope. And so, they waited, huddled together in the darkness, waiting for the dawn to come. As the hours ticked by, Emily began to hear strange noises in the darkness. At first, she thought it was just the mine's old wooden beams creaking, but then she heard footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps, echoing off the mine's walls. Emily's heart sank. The zombies had found them. She grabbed Jake's arm, pulling him close. "We have to get out of here," she whispered. But as they turned to make a run, Emily stumbled, her foot catching on a loose rock. She fell hard, her palms scraping against the rough stone floor. Jake rushed to her side, helping her to her feet. "Come on, we have to get out of here," he yelled, his voice echoing off the mine's walls. But it was too late. The zombies had already seen them, and they were closing in fast. Emily and Jake took off in a sprint, their footsteps echoing off the mine's walls as they desperately tried to outrun the undead horde. As they ran, the darkness seemed to close in around them. The mine's tunnels twisted and turned, making it impossible to see more than a few feet in front of them. But Emily knew they couldn't stop now. They had to keep moving, no matter what. She pumped her arms harder, her heart pounding in her chest as she pushed herself to run faster. Jake was right behind her, his breathing ragged as he struggled to keep up. "Emily, wait," he yelled, his voice barely audible over the sound of their own footsteps. But Emily didn't dare look back. She knew that if she did, she would see the zombies closing in, their eyes fixed on her with an unnatural hunger. Instead, she kept her eyes fixed on the path ahead, her heart pounding in her chest as she desperately tried to find a way out of the mine. As they ran, the tunnels began to narrow, the air growing thick with the smell of decay. Emily's stomach churned, her senses reeling as she struggled to keep her footing on the rough stone floor. And then, just when she thought they were going to make it, Emily saw it. A dead end, looming in front of them like a trap. She skidded to a stop, her heart sinking as she realized they were trapped. The zombies were closing in, their moans and groans echoing off the mine's walls as they prepared to make their final attack. Emily turned to Jake, her eyes wide with fear. "What do we do now?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of their own ragged breathing. Jake's face was set, his eyes fixed on the zombies as they closed in. "We fight," he said, his voice firm. "We fight to the death." And with that, Emily and Jake steeled themselves for the final battle. They knew it was going to be brutal, that they might not make it out alive. But they also knew they had no choice. They had to fight, no matter what. For their lives, for their sanity, and for the slim chance of escape that still lingered in their minds. As the zombies closed in, their eyes fixed on Emily and Jake with an unnatural hunger, the two survivors steeled themselves for the fight of their lives. They knew it was going to be bloody, that it was going to be brutal. But they also knew they had to try. For themselves, for each other, and for the hope of a future that still lingered in their minds. And so, with a fierce determination burning in their hearts, Emily and Jake charged forward, ready to face whatever horrors lay ahead. The battle was intense, the two survivors fighting for their lives as the zombies closed in. Emily swung her pickaxe with all her might, the blade biting deep into the flesh of the undead. Jake fought alongside her, his fists flying as he took down zombie after zombie. Together, they fought bravely, their movements swift and deadly as they desperately tried to hold off the undead horde. But despite their bravery, Emily and Jake were vastly outnumbered. The zombies just kept coming, their bodies piling up as the two survivors fought to stay alive. As the battle raged on, Emily began to feel a sense of hopelessness creeping in. They were never going to make it out of this alive. The zombies were too numerous, too relentless. But Jake seemed to sense her doubts. He grabbed her arm, his eyes locked on hers. "We can do this," he yelled, his voice barely audible over the sound of the battle. "We just have to keep fighting." Emily nodded, her determination renewed. Together, they fought on, their movements swift and deadly as they desperately tried to hold off the undead horde. And then, just when it seemed like all was lost, Emily saw a glimmer of light in the distance. It was a way out, a chance for escape. With renewed hope, Emily and Jake fought their way towards the light, the zombies closing in behind them. They burst through the mine's entrance, gasping in the cool night air as they emerged into the bright sunlight. They didn't stop running until they were sure they had left the zombies behind. Finally, they collapsed on the ground, exhausted but alive. As they caught their breath, Emily turned to Jake. "Thanks," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I owe you one." Jake smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "We're in this together, now." Emily nodded, feeling a sense of gratitude towards Jake. She didn't know what she would have done without him. As they sat there, catching their breath and trying to process what had just happened, Emily realized that they couldn't stay there for long. The zombies could come back at any moment, and they needed to find a safe place to hide. "Hey, Jake," she said, her voice a little louder now. "We need to get out of here. We need to find a safe place to hide." Jake nodded, his eyes scanning the surrounding area. "I know a place," he said. "It's not far from here. We can make it there on foot." Emily nodded, standing up and brushing off her pants. "Okay, let's go." As they walked, Emily couldn't help but wonder what had caused the outbreak. What had turned the people of Ravenswood into mindless, flesh-eating zombies? She glanced over at Jake, who was walking beside her. "Hey, Jake," she said. "Do you have any idea what caused this?" Jake shook his head. "No, I don't," he said. "But I think it has something to do with the mine." Emily's eyes narrowed. "The mine," she repeated. "What do you mean?" Jake hesitated, his eyes scanning the surrounding area as if he was afraid of being overheard. "I don't know if I should be telling you this," he said, "but I think the mine is the source of the outbreak." Emily's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I think something was released from the mine," he said. "Something that infected the people of Ravenswood." Emily's mind was racing. She thought back to the hospital, to the patients who had come in with the strange virus. She thought about the mine, and the strange noises she had heard coming from it. And then, it clicked. The mine, the virus, the zombies. It all made sense now. "Oh my God," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think I know what happened." Jake's eyes locked on hers. "What is it?" he asked, his voice urgent. Emily took a deep breath, her mind racing with the implications. "I think the mine is the source of the outbreak," she said. "And I think we're the only ones who can stop it." Jake's eyes widened in shock. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily hesitated, unsure of how to explain. "I think something was released from the mine," she said. "Something that infected the people of Ravenswood." Jake's face went pale. "You mean like a virus?" he asked. Emily nodded. "Yes, exactly. A virus that reanimates the dead." Jake's eyes locked on hers. "We have to get out of here," he said. "We have to find a way to stop this." Emily nodded, determination burning in her heart. "I know," she said. "But first, we need to find a safe place to hide." Jake nodded, his eyes scanning the surrounding area. "I know a place," he said. "Follow me." They walked for what felt like hours, the sun beating down on them like a relentless drumbeat. Finally, they arrived at a small cabin on the outskirts of town. Jake pushed open the door, revealing a cozy interior with a fireplace and a small kitchen. "Welcome to my home," he said, smiling. Emily smiled back, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. "Thanks," she said. "I really appreciate it." As they settled in, Emily couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. They were safe for now, but she knew that the zombies could find them at any moment. She looked over at Jake, who was busy building a fire in the fireplace. "Hey, Jake," she said. He looked up, his eyes locking on hers. "Yeah." Emily hesitated, unsure of how to ask. "Do you think we'll ever be able to go back to our normal lives?" she asked. Jake's face went somber, his eyes clouding over. "I don't know," he said. "I hope so. But for now, we just have to focus on surviving." Emily nodded, feeling a sense of determination burn in her heart. She was going to survive, no matter what. And she was going to find a way to stop the zombies, no matter what it took. As the night wore on, Emily and Jake sat by the fire, watching the flames dance and listening to the silence. It was a fragile peace, but it was peace nonetheless. And as they sat there, Emily felt a sense of hope that she hadn't felt in days. Maybe, just maybe, they would make it through this after all. As the night wore on, Emily and Jake grew more and more tired. They had been running and fighting for what felt like an eternity, and they were both exhausted. Finally, they decided to get some rest. Jake pulled out a couple of blankets and they settled in for the night, the fire crackling softly in the background. As Emily drifted off to sleep, she felt a sense of unease. She knew that the zombies could still be out there, waiting for them. But she was too tired to worry about it now. She fell into a deep sleep, haunted by dreams of the undead. She dreamed of running and fighting, of trying to escape the hordes of zombies that seemed to be everywhere. But when she woke up the next morning, she felt a sense of determination. She and Jake were going to survive this, no matter what. They were going to find a way to stop the zombies and reclaim their town. Jake was already up and moving, building a small fire in the fireplace. "Good morning," he said, smiling at Emily. Emily smiled back, feeling a sense of hope. "Good morning," she replied. As they ate a small breakfast, Emily realized that they needed to come up with a plan. They couldn't just sit around and wait for the zombies to come to them. They needed to take action. "Jake, we need to talk," she said, her voice serious. Jake looked up, his eyes locking on hers. "What is it?" he asked. Emily took a deep breath. "We need to come up with a plan," she said. "We can't just sit around and wait for the zombies to come to us. We need to take action." Jake nodded, his face set. "I agree," he said. "But what can we do? We're just two people against an army of zombies." Emily hesitated, unsure of what to say. But then, an idea struck her. "I think I know what we can do," she said, a plan forming in her mind. Jake's eyes locked on hers, his expression curious. "What is it?" he asked. Emily smiled, a sense of determination burning in her heart. "We're going to find the source of the outbreak," she said. "And we're going to stop it." Jake's eyes widened in surprise, but then, a slow smile spread across his face. "I'm in," he said. "Let's do it." Emily and Jake spent the rest of the day gathering supplies and preparing for their mission. They packed food, water, and medical supplies, as well as weapons to defend themselves against the zombies. As they worked, Emily couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement. She was scared, of course, who wouldn't be? But she was also determined. She was going to find the source of the outbreak and stop it, no matter what it took. Finally, they were ready. They set off towards the mine, their hearts pounding in their chests. As they walked, Emily could feel the weight of their mission settling on her shoulders. They were the only ones who could stop the outbreak. If they failed, the entire town would be lost. After what felt like hours of walking, they finally arrived at the mine. It was a huge, imposing structure that loomed over them like a monolith. Emily felt a shiver run down her spine as she looked up at it. "Okay," Jake said, his voice low and serious. "Here's the plan. We'll go in, find the source of the outbreak, and destroy it. Then we'll get out and make sure the town is safe." Emily nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "Let's do it," she said. They entered the mine, their flashlights casting flickering shadows on the walls. The air was thick with the smell of decay and rot, and Emily could feel the weight of the mine's history bearing down on her. As they made their way deeper into the mine, Emily began to feel a sense of unease. Something was off. She could feel it. Suddenly, Jake stopped, his flashlight beam fixed on something ahead. "What is it?" Emily whispered, her heart racing. Jake didn't answer. He just kept staring, his eyes fixed on something in the distance. And then, Emily saw it too. A figure, standing in the shadows. Watching them, Emily's heart skipped a beat. "What do we do?" she whispered. Jake didn't answer. He just kept staring, his eyes fixed on the figure. And then, without warning, the figure started to move towards them. As the figure moved closer, Emily could see that it was a woman. She was dressed in a white lab coat, and her hair was pulled back into a tight bun. "Who are you?" Emily asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The woman didn't answer. She just kept walking towards them, her eyes fixed on Emily and Jake. As she got closer, Emily could see that the woman's eyes were strange. They were cloudy and white, and they seemed to be staring right through her. "Jake, I don't like this," Emily whispered, her heart racing. Jake didn't answer. He just kept staring at the woman, his eyes fixed on hers. The woman stopped in front of them, her eyes still fixed on Emily and Jake. And then, in a voice that was barely above a whisper, she spoke. "Welcome," she said. "I've been waiting for you." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. "Who are you?" she asked again. The woman smiled, her lips curling up into a cold, calculating smile. My name is Dr. Samantha Taylor, she said. And I'm the one who's been responsible for the outbreak. Emily's eyes widened in shock. You're the one who's been responsible for the outbreak, she repeated. Dr. Taylor nodded, her smile growing wider. Yes, she said. I've been working on a cure for cancer. But something went wrong. The virus mutated, and it spread quickly. Emily felt a wave of anger wash over her. You're the one who's been responsible for all of these deaths, she asked, her voice shaking with rage. Dr. Taylor shrugged, her smile faltering for a moment. I didn't mean for it to happen, she said. But it did. And now, I'm trying to find a cure. Emily's eyes narrowed. A cure, she repeated. You're trying to find a cure. Dr. Taylor nodded, her smile growing wider again. Yes, she said. I've been working on a vaccine. And I think I'm close to finding it. Emily's heart skipped a beat. A vaccine, she repeated. You think you can cure this thing? Dr. Taylor nodded, her eyes shining with excitement. Yes, she said. I'm sure of it. And with that, Emily felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to stop the outbreak after all. Dr. Taylor led them deeper into the mine, explaining her research and the progress she had made on the vaccine. Emily and Jake listened intently, their hopes rising with every step. As they walked, Emily couldn't help but notice the strange equipment and machinery that lined the walls of the mine. It looked like Dr. Taylor had been conducting some kind of experiments down here. What's all this equipment for? Emily asked, nodding towards the machinery. Dr. Taylor hesitated, her eyes darting nervously towards Jake. I've been conducting some experiments, she said, trying to understand the virus and how it works. Jake's eyes narrowed. What kind of experiments? He asked, his voice firm. Dr. Taylor hesitated again, her eyes darting nervously towards Emily. I've been testing the virus on subjects, she said, trying to understand how it spreads and how it can be stopped. Emily's eyes widened in horror. Subjects, she repeated. You mean people? Dr. Taylor nodded, her eyes dropping to the floor. Yes, she said. I've been testing the virus on people. Jake's face went white with rage. You're a monster, he spat, his voice trembling with anger. Dr. Taylor looked up, her eyes flashing with defiance. I'm trying to save lives, she said. I'm trying to find a cure. But Emily and Jake were unconvinced. They knew that Dr. Taylor's methods were morally wrong, and they couldn't trust her. As they stood there, frozen in shock and horror, Emily realized that they had to get out of there. They had to escape from Dr. Taylor and her twisted experiments. Jake, we have to get out of here, Emily whispered, her eyes locked on Dr. Taylor. Jake nodded, his eyes flashing with agreement. Let's go, he whispered back. And with that, they turned and ran, fleeing from Dr. Taylor and her sinister experiments. But as they emerged from the mine, they were met with a sight that made their blood run cold. The town was in chaos. Zombies were roaming the streets, attacking anyone who crossed their path. And in the center of it all, Dr. Taylor stood, a triumphant smile spreading across her face. It's too late, she called out, her voice echoing across the town. The virus has spread too far. You'll never be able to stop it. Emily and Jake exchanged a desperate glance. They knew they had to act fast, or risk losing everything. But as they charged into battle, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were fighting a losing war. Emily and Jake fought bravely, taking down zombie after zombie. But no matter how hard they fought, they couldn't seem to make a dent in the sheer number of undead. As the battle raged on, Emily began to feel a sense of despair creeping in. They were never going to win this fight. The zombies were too numerous, too relentless. Just when she thought things couldn't get any worse, Emily saw Dr. Taylor standing on the outskirts of the battle, a smug smile spreading across her face. You'll never win, Dr. Taylor called out, her voice echoing across the battlefield. My virus is too powerful. It will consume everything in its path. Emily's eyes narrowed. She was determined to prove Dr. Taylor wrong. She fought on, taking down zombie after zombie. But just when she thought she was making progress, Emily felt a hand grab her shoulder. She spun around, ready to fight. But it wasn't a zombie. It was Jake, and he was covered in blood. "Jake, no!" Emily screamed, her heart racing with fear. Jake stumbled forward, his eyes cloudy with infection. "Emily," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I'm sorry." And with that, Jake collapsed to the ground, his body still twitching with the virus. Emily was consumed by grief. She had lost her friend, her ally. She was alone now, surrounded by zombies. But she refused to give up. She fought on, taking down zombie after zombie. She was determined to make Dr. Taylor pay for what she had done. As the battle raged on, Emily began to feel a sense of exhaustion creeping in. She was tired, hungry, and thirsty. She didn't know how much longer she could keep fighting. But she refused to give up. She kept fighting, taking down zombie after zombie. And then, just when she thought she was going to collapse from exhaustion, Emily saw a glimmer of hope. A small group of survivors, led by a grizzled old soldier, was making its way towards her. "Emily, we've got your back," the soldier called out, his voice echoing across the battlefield. Emily's eyes welled up with tears. She had never felt so grateful in her life. Together, the survivors fought on, taking down zombie after zombie. They were a small but determined group, and they were determined to take back their town. As the battle raged on, Emily began to feel a sense of hope creeping in. Maybe, just maybe, they could win this fight after all. With renewed energy and determination, Emily and the survivors fought on, taking down zombie after zombie. They moved through the streets, clearing a path through the hordes of undead. As they fought, Emily noticed that the zombies seemed to be getting weaker. They were slower, more sluggish, and easier to take down. She mentioned this to the soldier, who nodded thoughtfully. "I think I know why," he said. "I've been noticing that the zombies seem to be decaying faster. I think the virus is burning itself out." Emily's eyes widened in hope. Could it be true? Was the virus finally starting to lose its hold on the town? The soldier nodded. "I think we might actually have a chance to win this thing," he said. Emily felt a surge of determination. They were going to win this fight, no matter what it took. With renewed energy, the survivors pressed on, clearing a path through the zombies. They moved through the streets, taking back the town block by block. As the sun began to set, Emily and the survivors finally reached the town hall. It was the last stronghold of the zombies, and Emily knew that taking it back would be the key to winning the fight. The soldier nodded, his eyes locked on the town hall. "This is it," he said. "This is our last stand." Emily nodded, her heart pounding with determination. They were going to take back the town hall, no matter what it took. With a fierce cry, the survivors charged forward, taking down zombies left and right. Emily fought bravely, her machete slicing through the undead hordes. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached the entrance to the town hall. It was a massive, ornate door, and Emily knew that taking it down would be the key to winning the fight. The soldier nodded, his eyes locked on the door. "This is it," he said. "This is our moment." With a fierce cry, the survivors charged forward, taking down the door and storming into the town hall. Emily fought bravely, her machete slicing through the undead hordes. And then, suddenly, it was over. The zombies were defeated, and the town hall was theirs. Emily stood tall, her chest heaving with exhaustion. They had done it. They had taken back the town. But as she looked around, Emily realized that the fight was far from over. The town was in ruins, and there were still zombies out there, waiting to strike. The soldier nodded, his eyes locked on Emily's. "We've got a long road ahead of us," he said. "But we've got this. We've got each other." Emily nodded, a sense of determination burning in her heart. They were going to rebuild this town, and they were going to make it stronger than ever. The survivors cheered, their voices echoing through the empty halls of the town hall. Emily smiled, feeling a sense of hope that she hadn't felt in weeks. They were going to make it through this. They were going to survive. As the survivors cheered, Emily felt a sense of pride and accomplishment wash over her. They had done it. They had taken back the town. But as she looked around at the ruined buildings and the scattered debris, Emily knew that their work was far from over. They had to rebuild, and they had to make sure that the zombies never came back. The soldier nodded, as if reading her thoughts. "We've got a lot of work to do," he said. "But we can do it. We've got each other." Emily smiled, feeling a sense of gratitude towards the soldier. He had been a rock throughout the entire ordeal, and she didn't know what she would have done without him. As the survivors began to disperse, Emily turned to the soldier. "What's your name?" she asked. The soldier smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "My name is Marcus," he said. "And you are?" Emily smiled back, feeling a sense of connection to Marcus. "I'm Emily," she said. Marcus nodded, his eyes locked on hers. "It's nice to meet you, Emily," he said. As they stood there, Emily felt a sense of hope that she hadn't felt in weeks. Maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild this town and make it stronger than ever. But as she looked around at the ruined buildings and the scattered debris, Emily knew that it wouldn't be easy. They had a long road ahead of them, and they would have to face many challenges along the way. Marcus seemed to sense her doubts, and he placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll get through this, Emily," he said. "We'll rebuild this town, and we'll make it stronger than ever." Emily smiled, feeling a sense of gratitude towards Marcus. She knew that she could count on him, no matter what. And as they stood there, surrounded by the ruins of their town, Emily felt a sense of hope that she hadn't felt in weeks. Maybe, just maybe, they could make it through this after all. As the days turned into weeks, Emily, Marcus, and the other survivors worked tirelessly to rebuild their town. They cleared the streets of debris, repaired damaged buildings, and established a new system of government. Emily and Marcus grew closer as they worked together, their mutual respect and admiration for each other blossoming into a romance. They would often sit together on the rooftop of the town hall, watching the sunset over the newly rebuilt town. But despite the progress they had made, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She would catch glimpses of strange figures lurking in the shadows, and she would hear whispers in the wind. One night, as she and Marcus sat on the rooftop, Emily turned to him with a concerned expression. "Marcus, I've been seeing things," she said. "I've been hearing whispers. I think something is wrong." Marcus's expression turned serious, and he took Emily's hand in his. "I've seen things too," he said. "I've heard whispers. But I don't know what it means." Emily's eyes widened in fear. "Do you think it's the zombies?" she asked. "Do you think they are coming back?" Marcus shook his head. "I don't think it's the zombies," he said. "I think it's something else. Something worse." Emily's heart skipped a beat. "What could be worse than the zombies?" she asked. Marcus's expression turned grim. "I don't know," he said. "But I think we're about to find out." As they sat there, the wind began to pick up, and the whispers grew louder. Emily and Marcus exchanged a nervous glance, and then they stood up, ready to face whatever was coming their way. But as they looked out over the town, they saw something that made their blood run cold. A figure, tall and imposing, was standing in the center of the town, and it was watching them. Emily's heart skipped a beat. "What is that?" she whispered. Marcus's expression turned grim. "I don't know," he said. "But I think it's the start of something bad." As they stood there, frozen in fear, the figure began to move towards them. Emily and Marcus knew that they had to act fast, or risk losing everything they had worked for. But as they turned to run, Emily realized that she had forgotten something important. The figure was not alone. There were others, lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike. And Emily knew that she and Marcus were in grave danger. As the figure drew closer, Emily could see that it was a woman. She was tall and imposing, with long silver hair that cascaded down her back like a river of moonlight. The woman's eyes were black as coal, and they seemed to bore into Emily's soul. Emily felt a shiver run down her spine as the woman's gaze locked onto hers. "Who are you?" Emily asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The woman didn't answer. Instead, she reached out a long, bony hand and beckoned to Emily. Emily felt a surge of fear. She didn't know what this woman wanted, but she knew she didn't want to find out. "Marcus, run!" Emily shouted, grabbing Marcus's arm and pulling him towards the stairs. But it was too late. The woman was too fast. She reached out and grabbed Emily's wrist, her grip like a vice. Emily tried to struggle, but the woman's grip was too strong. She was pulled back, away from Marcus and the safety of the town hall. As she was dragged away, Emily saw Marcus's face, contorted with fear and worry. She knew he would come for her, but she also knew that she might not be alive when he did. The woman pulled Emily through the streets, dodging debris and leaping over obstacles with an unnatural agility. Emily stumbled and fell, skinning her knee on the rough pavement. But the woman didn't stop. She dragged Emily to her feet and kept moving, her grip never faltering. Finally, they reached the outskirts of town. The woman pulled Emily into a dark and abandoned building, slamming the door shut behind them. Emily was trapped. She was alone and defenseless, at the mercy of this strange and terrifying woman. And as she looked into the woman's black eyes, Emily knew that she was in grave danger. The woman was not human. She was something else entirely. Something ancient. Something evil. The woman's eyes seemed to bore into Emily's soul, and Emily felt a chill run down her spine. She tried to struggle, but the woman's grip was too strong. "You're a curious thing," the woman said, her voice low and husky. "I've been watching you, Emily. I've been watching you and Marcus." Emily's eyes widened in fear. "What do you want?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The woman smiled, her lips curling up into a cold, cruel smile. "I want to show you something," she said. "Something that will change everything." And with that, the woman pulled Emily deeper into the abandoned building. They moved through dark and dusty rooms, the only sound the creaking of the old wooden floorboards. Finally, they reached a large, dimly lit room. The room was filled with strange and ominous objects, and Emily felt a sense of trepidation wash over her. In the center of the room, Emily saw a large, stone sarcophagus. It was adorned with strange symbols and markings, and Emily felt a sense of foreboding wash over her. The woman pushed Emily forward, forcing her to approach the sarcophagus. As Emily reached out to touch it, the woman spoke. "This is the source of the outbreak," she said. "This is where it all began." Emily's eyes widened in horror. "What is it?" she asked. The woman smiled again, her eyes glinting with malevolence. "It's a tomb," she said. "A tomb for something ancient and evil." And with that, the woman reached out and opened the sarcophagus. A dark, misty cloud emerged, and Emily felt a sense of dread wash over her. As she looked into the sarcophagus, Emily saw something that made her blood run cold. A figure, tall and imposing, was emerging from the mist. And Emily knew that she was staring into the face of pure evil. The figure emerged from the mist, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. Emily felt a chill run down her spine as the figure began to take shape. It was tall and imposing, with skin that seemed to shift and writhe like a living thing. Its eyes burned with an inner fire, and Emily felt herself being drawn into their depths. The woman spoke, her voice dripping with reverence. "Behold, the Master," she said. "The one who has brought us to this point." Emily tried to step back, but her feet seemed rooted to the spot. The figure began to move towards her, its eyes fixed on hers. As it drew closer, Emily felt a sense of madness wash over her. She was consumed by visions of death and destruction, of a world gone mad. The figure reached out a hand and touched Emily's forehead. She felt a surge of energy run through her body, and suddenly she was flooded with visions of the past and the future. She saw the world before the outbreak, a world of peace and prosperity. She saw the outbreak itself, the chaos and destruction that it had brought. And she saw the future, a future of darkness and despair. A future in which the zombies had won, and humanity was extinct. Emily's mind reeled as the visions faded. She stumbled backwards, gasping for breath. The woman spoke, her voice dripping with malice. "Now you see," she said. "Now you understand." Emily shook her head, trying to clear the cobwebs. "What do you want from me?" she asked. The woman smiled, her eyes glinting with malevolence. "I want you to join us," she said. "I want you to help us bring about the new world." Emily's eyes widened in horror. "No," she said. "I'll never join you." The woman's smile grew wider. "We'll see about that," she said. The woman's eyes seemed to bore into Emily's soul, and Emily felt a chill run down her spine. She knew that she had to get out of there, and fast. But as she turned to run, Emily felt a hand grab her arm. It was the woman, her grip like a vice. "You're not going anywhere," the woman hissed, her eyes blazing with fury. Emily tried to struggle, but the woman's grip was too strong. She was trapped. Just as all hope seemed lost, Emily heard a loud crash from the hallway. The woman's head jerked up, and Emily saw a look of surprise cross her face. "Marcus!" Emily shouted, her heart racing with excitement. The woman's grip on Emily's arm tightened, but Emily didn't care. She knew that Marcus was here, and he was going to save her. As the woman dragged Emily towards the door, Emily saw Marcus burst into the room. He was armed with a baseball bat, and his eyes were blazing with fury. "Let her go!" Marcus shouted, charging towards the woman. The woman sneered, but Emily saw a flicker of fear in her eyes. She knew that Marcus was a force to be reckoned with. With a sudden burst of strength, Emily wrenched her arm free from the woman's grip. She stumbled backwards, gasping for breath. Marcus reached her side, his eyes scanning her face. "Emily, are you okay?" he asked. Emily nodded, still gasping for breath. "I'm fine," she said. Marcus's eyes narrowed. "We need to get out of here," he said. "Now!" As they turned to run, Emily saw the woman's face twist with rage. "You'll never escape," she screamed. But Emily and Marcus didn't look back. They ran as fast as they could, the woman's screams echoing behind them. They finally emerged into the bright sunlight, gasping for breath. Emily looked up at Marcus, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thanks for saving me," she said. Marcus smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Anytime," he said. As they walked away from the abandoned building, Emily knew that she would never forget this moment. She had come close to death, but Marcus had saved her. And as they walked, Emily realized that she had feelings for Marcus. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew that she wanted to spend it with him. As they walked, Emily couldn't help but steal glances at Marcus. She had always thought of him as just a friend, but now she was starting to see him in a different light. Marcus seemed to sense her gaze, and he turned to her with a smile. "Hey, what's up?" he asked. Emily felt a blush rise to her cheeks, and she quickly looked away. "Nothing," she said, trying to sound nonchalant. But Marcus wasn't fooled. He knew Emily too well. "Come on, Emily," he said, his voice low and teasing. "I can tell when something's bothering you." Emily sighed, feeling a flutter in her chest. "It's just, I don't know, Marcus," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I feel like I'm seeing you in a different way now." Marcus's eyes locked onto hers, and Emily felt a jolt of electricity run through her body. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice low and husky. Emily took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. "I mean, I think I might have feelings for you, Marcus," she said, the words tumbling out of her mouth. Marcus's eyes widened in surprise, and then a slow smile spread across his face. "I've had feelings for you too, Emily," he said, his voice filled with emotion. As they stood there, the tension between them was palpable. Emily felt like she was melting into Marcus's gaze, and she knew that she was falling deeply in love with him. And then, without another word, Marcus leaned in and kissed her. Emily felt a rush of excitement and happiness, and she knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be. As they pulled back from the kiss, Emily smiled up at Marcus. "I'm glad we finally figured it out," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus grinned, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Me too," he said. "Me too." And as they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, Emily knew that she had found her soulmate in Marcus. She was excited to see what the future held for them, and she knew that she would always be by his side. As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, Emily felt a sense of peace and happiness that she had never felt before. She knew that she had found her soulmate in Marcus, and she was excited to see what the future held for them. But as they stood there, basking in the glow of their newfound love, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She looked around, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Marcus seemed to sense her unease, and he pulled her closer. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice low and soothing. Emily hesitated, not wanting to ruin the moment. "I don't know," she said. "I just feel like we're being watched." Marcus's eyes scanned the surrounding area, and then he nodded. "I think I know what you mean," he said. "Let's get out of here." They walked quickly, their arms around each other, as they made their way back to the safety of their hideout. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed, and she kept looking over her shoulder, expecting to see something lurking in the shadows. But they made it back to the hideout without incident, and Emily breathed a sigh of relief as they stepped inside. She knew that they were safe, at least for the moment. As they settled in for the night, Emily couldn't help but wonder what the future held for them. Would they be able to survive in this new world, or would they succumb to the dangers that lurked around every corner? She looked over at Marcus, who was watching her with a serious expression. "What are you thinking?" she asked. Marcus's eyes seemed to bore into her soul. "I'm thinking that we need to be careful," he said. "We need to watch our backs, and be prepared for anything." Emily nodded, feeling a sense of determination wash over her. She knew that they would face many challenges in the days ahead, but she was ready. She was ready to fight for their survival, and for their love. As they settled in for the night, Emily knew that she and Marcus would face whatever the future held, together. As the days turned into weeks, Emily and Marcus continued to survive in the new world. They scavenged for food and supplies, and worked together to build a safe and secure home. But despite the dangers that lurked around every corner, Emily felt a sense of happiness and contentment that she had never felt before. She was in love with Marcus, and she knew that he felt the same way about her. One day, as they were out scavenging for supplies, Marcus turned to Emily with a serious expression. "I've been thinking," he said. "We need to find a way to make this world a better place." Emily's eyes widened in surprise. "What do you mean?" she asked. Marcus's eyes seemed to bore into her soul. "I mean that we can't just survive in this world," he said. "We need to thrive. We need to make a difference." Emily felt a surge of excitement and purpose. She knew that Marcus was right. They couldn't just sit back and wait for someone else to fix the world. They had to take action. "What did you have in mind?" Emily asked, her eyes shining with excitement. Marcus smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I was thinking that we could start by finding other survivors," he said. "We could build a community, work together to make this world a better place." Emily's heart swelled with emotion. She knew that Marcus was right. They could make a difference. They could build a better world. And as they walked back to their home, hand in hand, Emily knew that she and Marcus were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. They were ready to build a new world, together. As they approached their home, Emily noticed something strange. There was a piece of paper taped to the door, with a message scrawled on it. Emily's heart skipped a beat as she read the message. "Marcus, look at this," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. Marcus's eyes widened as he read the message. "It's from another survivor," he said. "They are asking to meet with us." Emily's eyes locked onto Marcus's. "Do you think it's a trap?" she asked. Marcus's expression was serious. "We'll have to be careful," he said. "But I think it's worth the risk." Emily nodded, her heart pounding with excitement. She knew that this could be the start of something big. Something that could change the course of their lives forever. Emily and Marcus exchanged a nervous glance. They had been surviving on their own for so long. The idea of meeting another survivor was both exciting and terrifying. "Let's do it," Emily said finally, her voice firm. "We can't just hide forever." Marcus nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "You're right," he said. "Let's go." They made their way to the designated meeting point, an old gas station on the outskirts of town. As they approached, Emily could feel her heart pounding in her chest. What if it was a trap? What if the other survivor was hostile? But as they entered the gas station, Emily saw a figure waiting for them. It was a young woman, with a look of determination etched on her face. "Hello," the woman said, her voice firm. "My name is Sarah. I've been surviving on my own for weeks." Emily and Marcus exchanged a wary glance, but Sarah's words put them at ease. She seemed genuine, and her story was similar to their own. As they talked, Emily realized that Sarah was more than just a survivor. She was a leader with a vision for rebuilding their community. "I've been searching for other survivors," Sarah said, her eyes shining with determination. "I want to build a new community, one that's safe and secure." Emily felt a surge of excitement. This was exactly what she and Marcus had been talking about. "We're in," Emily said, her voice firm. "We'll help you build this community." Marcus nodded in agreement, and Sarah smiled, a look of relief washing over her face. "Thank you," Sarah said, her voice filled with emotion. "Together, we can rebuild our world." As they left the gas station, Emily felt a sense of hope that she hadn't felt in months. They were going to rebuild their community, and they were going to do it together. But as they walked, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She looked around, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. "Marcus, do you feel that?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus's eyes scanned the surrounding area, and then he nodded. "Yes, I feel it too," he said. "Let's get back to our hideout. Now!" As they quickly made their way back to their hideout, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. She kept looking over her shoulder, expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. But every time she looked, there was no one there. When they finally reached the safety of their hideout, Emily let out a sigh of relief. She was glad to be off the streets, where they were vulnerable to attack. Marcus locked the door behind them, and then turned to Emily with a serious expression. "We need to be careful," he said. "If someone is following us, we don't know what their intentions are." Emily nodded, feeling a chill run down her spine. She knew that Marcus was right. They had to be careful. Just as they were starting to relax, they heard a knock at the door. Emily's heart skipped a beat as she exchanged a nervous glance with Marcus. "Who could that be?" Emily whispered. Marcus's expression was grim. "I don't know," he said. "But we're not going to answer it." They stood there in silence, waiting to see if the person would go away. But the knocking continued, growing louder and more insistent. Suddenly, a voice called out from the other side of the door. "Emily, Marcus, it's Sarah. I need to talk to you." Emily's eyes widened in surprise. What was Sarah doing here? Marcus's expression was cautious. "How did she find us?" he whispered. Emily shrugged. "I don't know," she said, "but I think we should let her in." Marcus nodded, and then carefully unlocked the door. Sarah stood outside, looking anxious and worried. "What's wrong?" Emily asked, as Sarah rushed inside. Sarah's eyes were wide with fear. "I've been followed," she said. "I think someone is watching me." Emily's heart skipped a beat. This was getting more and more serious by the minute. "We need to get to the bottom of this," Marcus said, his expression grim. "We can't just sit back and wait for something to happen." Emily nodded, feeling a sense of determination wash over her. They were going to figure out who was following them, and they were going to put a stop to it. As they sat down to discuss the situation, Emily couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. Who was following them, and what did they want? Sarah explained that she had been noticing strange things for days. She would see movement out of the corner of her eye, but whenever she turned to look, there would be no one there. "I thought it was just my imagination," Sarah said. "But then I started to notice other things. Footprints outside my hideout, strange noises at night." Emily's eyes widened as she listened. This was getting more and more serious by the minute. "We need to set up a trap," Marcus said, his expression grim. "We need to catch whoever is doing this and find out what they want." Emily nodded, feeling a sense of determination wash over her. They were going to get to the bottom of this, no matter what it took. As they made plans to set up a trap, Emily couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. What if they were walking into a trap themselves? But she pushed the thought aside and focused on the task at hand. They were going to catch whoever was following them, and they were going to make sure they never bothered them again. As they set up the trap, Emily felt a sense of excitement mixed with fear. What would they catch? As they waited, Emily's nerves began to get the better of her. What if they had made a mistake? But then, just as she was starting to think that nothing was going to happen, they heard a noise. Footsteps, coming from outside. Emily's heart skipped a beat as she exchanged a nervous glance with Marcus and Sarah. This was it. They were about to catch whoever was following them. As the footsteps got closer, Emily felt her senses go on high alert. She was ready for whatever was about to happen. And then, just as the person was about to enter the trap, Emily saw a figure emerge from the shadows. A figure she recognized. Emily's eyes widened in shock as she realized who the figure was. It was Rachel, a girl from their school who had gone missing during the outbreak. Rachel looked different now, her eyes sunken and her skin pale. She looked like she had been living on the streets for weeks. "Rachel," Emily said, her voice shaking with surprise. "Is that you?" Rachel's eyes locked onto Emily's, and for a moment, Emily thought she saw a glimmer of recognition. But then, Rachel's expression changed, and she looked at Emily with a cold, hard gaze. "I've been watching you," Rachel said, her voice low and menacing. "I've been watching you and Marcus, and I know all about your little hideout." Emily felt a chill run down her spine as Rachel's words sent a shiver of fear through her. What did Rachel want? "Why have you been following us?" Marcus asked, his voice firm. Rachel's smile grew wider. "I've been waiting for the perfect moment to strike," she said. "And now that I've found you, you're going to help me get what I want." Emily's eyes narrowed. "What do you want?" she asked. Rachel's eyes gleamed with a sinister light. "I want the one thing that you have, and I don't," she said. "I want safety." As Rachel's words hung in the air, Emily realized that Rachel was more desperate than she had ever seen anyone before. And desperate people were capable of doing desperate things. Emily's eyes locked onto Rachel's, and she could see the desperation burning in them. Rachel was willing to do whatever it took to get what she wanted, and Emily knew that she and Marcus were in grave danger. "We can't just give you our hideout," Marcus said, his voice firm. "It's not safe." Rachel's smile grew wider. "Oh, I think it's very safe," she said. "Safer than being out on the streets, anyway." Emily's mind was racing. She knew that they couldn't trust Rachel, but she also knew that they couldn't just turn her away. Rachel was desperate, and desperate people were capable of doing terrible things. "What do you propose we do?" Emily asked, trying to stall for time. Rachel's eyes gleamed with excitement. "I propose that we make a deal," she said. "You let me stay in your hideout, and in return, I'll help you find more survivors." Emily exchanged a skeptical glance with Marcus. They didn't need Rachel's help, and they certainly didn't need her causing trouble in their hideout. But as Emily looked into Rachel's desperate eyes, she knew that they had to make a decision. They could either help Rachel, or they could turn her away and risk her causing harm to themselves or others. As Emily weighed their options, she knew that they had to make a choice. And fast. As Emily and Marcus deliberated, Sarah spoke up. "I don't think we can trust her," she said, her voice firm. Rachel's eyes narrowed. "You don't even know me," she said, her voice cold. Sarah stood her ground. "I don't need to know you to know that you're trouble," she said. Emily sighed, feeling a headache coming on. This was getting complicated. "Look, Rachel," Emily said, trying to reason with her. "We're not trying to be mean or exclusionary. It's just that we have to be careful. There are a lot of dangers out there." Rachel's expression softened slightly, and for a moment, Emily thought she saw a glimmer of the person Rachel used to be. "Please," Rachel said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just give me a chance. I'll do anything." Emily looked at Marcus and Sarah, and saw that they were both thinking the same thing. They couldn't just turn Rachel away. Not without trying to help her first. "Okay," Emily said finally, making a decision. "You can stay with us, but you have to promise to follow our rules and respect our space." Rachel's face lit up with a smile, and for a moment, Emily thought she saw a glimmer of hope. But as Rachel's smile faded, Emily saw something else in her eyes. Something that made her blood run cold. As Emily looked into Rachel's eyes, she saw a glimmer of something sinister. Something that made her wonder if she had just made a terrible mistake. But it was too late now. Rachel was already smiling and thanking them, her eyes shining with a newfound sense of hope. As they led Rachel to their hideout, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were making a mistake. That Rachel was not what she seemed. But as they settled in for the night, Emily tried to push her doubts aside. Maybe Rachel was genuinely looking for a fresh start. Maybe she was willing to work hard and earn their trust. As they sat down to a meal of scavenged food, Emily tried to make conversation with Rachel. But Rachel seemed distant, her eyes fixed on some point beyond Emily's shoulder. "Rachel, is everything okay?" Emily asked, starting to feel a sense of unease. Rachel's eyes snapped back into focus, and she smiled. "Yeah, everything's fine," she said. "I'm just a little tired." Emily nodded, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. That Rachel was hiding something. As the night wore on, Emily's doubts only grew stronger. She started to wonder if they had made a terrible mistake by trusting Rachel. And then, just as she was starting to drift off to sleep, Emily heard a noise. A faint rustling sound, coming from outside their hideout. She sat up, her heart racing, and looked over at Marcus and Sarah. They were both fast asleep, oblivious to the danger that might be lurking outside. But Rachel was not asleep. Rachel was sitting up, her eyes fixed intently on the door. And as Emily watched, Rachel's eyes seemed to gleam with a sinister light. A light that made Emily's blood run cold. As Emily watched, Rachel's eyes seemed to gleam with an otherworldly intensity. It was as if she was waiting for something, or someone. And then, without making a sound, Rachel slipped out of the hideout and into the night. Emily's heart was racing as she threw off her covers and followed Rachel. She had to know what was going on. As she emerged into the night air, Emily saw Rachel standing in the shadows, her eyes fixed on something in the distance. And then, as Emily watched in horror, a figure emerged from the darkness. A figure that Emily recognized. It was Alex, the leader of the gang that had been terrorizing the city. Alex's eyes locked onto Rachel, and he smiled. "Well done, Rachel," he said. "You've brought them right to us." Emily's blood ran cold as she realized the truth. Rachel was working with Alex. She had been playing them all along. As Alex's gang emerged from the shadows, Emily knew that they were in grave danger. They had to get out of there, fast. But as she turned to run, Emily felt a hand grab her arm. It was Rachel, her eyes gleaming with a sinister light. "You're not going anywhere," Rachel hissed, her voice dripping with malice. And with that, everything went black. When Emily came to, she was lying in a dark, damp room. She had no idea where she was or how she had gotten there. As she struggled to sit up, Emily realized that she was tied to a chair. Her wrists and ankles were bound with rope, and she was unable to move. Suddenly, a light flickered on, and Emily saw Alex standing in front of her. He was smiling, and his eyes gleamed with a sinister light. "Welcome, Emily," Alex said, his voice dripping with malice. "I've been waiting for you." Emily struggled against her bonds, but they were too tight. She was trapped. "What do you want from me?" Emily spat, trying to keep her voice steady. Alex chuckled. "Oh, I think you know exactly what I want," he said. "I want the location of your hideout, and I want you to tell me where Marcus and Sarah are." Emily's heart sank. She knew that she couldn't give Alex the information he wanted, but she also knew that she couldn't hold out for long. As Alex began to taunt her, Emily realized that she had to think fast. She had to come up with a plan to escape, and she had to do it quickly. But as she looked around the room, Emily realized that she was in a desperate situation. She was trapped, and she had no idea how to get out. Just as Alex was about to start torturing her, Emily heard a noise coming from outside the room. It sounded like footsteps, heavy and deliberate. Alex's head snapped up, and he looked at Emily with a mixture of surprise and anger. "What's going on?" he spat, storming out of the room. Emily was left alone, her heart pounding in her chest. She had no idea what was happening, but she knew that she had to take advantage of the distraction. With a surge of adrenaline, Emily began to struggle against her bonds. She had to get out of there, and she had to do it fast. As she worked to free herself, Emily heard the sound of gunfire and shouting coming from outside the room. It sounded like a battle was raging, and Emily had no idea who was winning. But she didn't care. All she cared about was escaping, and finding Marcus and Sarah. With a final burst of strength, Emily managed to free herself from her bonds. She stood up, her heart pounding in her chest, and made a run for the door. As she emerged into the hallway, Emily saw a figure standing in front of her. It was Marcus, his eyes locked onto hers with a look of relief. "Emily," he said, rushing towards her. "I was so worried about you." Emily threw herself into Marcus's arms, feeling a wave of relief wash over her. She was safe, and she was with the person she loved. But as they hugged, Emily heard the sound of gunfire and shouting growing louder. They weren't out of danger yet. "What's going on?" Emily asked, looking up at Marcus. Marcus's expression was grim. "It's Alex and his gang," he said. "They are fighting against a new group of survivors. We have to get out of here, now." Emily nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew that they had to keep moving, no matter what. As they turned to run, Emily saw Sarah standing behind them, a look of determination on her face. "Let's go," Sarah said, nodding at them. "We have a long way to go before we're safe." And with that, the three of them took off, running for their lives as the battle raged on behind them. As they ran, Emily could hear the sound of gunfire and shouting growing fainter. They were putting distance between themselves and the battle, and Emily felt a sense of relief wash over her. But as they turned a corner, Emily saw a figure standing in front of them. It was a woman, dressed in a pair of ripped jeans and a black leather jacket. She had a gun slung over her shoulder, and a look of determination in her eyes. "Who are you?" Marcus asked, his hand on Emily's arm. The woman smiled, a small, tight smile. "My name is Samantha," she said, "and I'm here to help you." Emily's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" she asked. Samantha's expression turned serious. "I've been watching you three," she said. "I know what you're going through, and I know how to help." Sarah stepped forward, her eyes locked onto Samantha's. "What do you know?" she asked. Samantha hesitated, and for a moment, Emily thought she saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "I know about the safe zones," Samantha said finally. "I know where they are, and how to get to them." Emily's heart skipped a beat. Safe zones. She had heard rumors of safe zones, areas that were protected from the gangs and the violence. But she had never thought they actually existed. "Is it true?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Samantha nodded. "Yes, it's true," she said, "and I can take you there." As Emily looked at Samantha, she felt a sense of hope that she hadn't felt in weeks. Maybe, just maybe, they had a chance to escape the violence and the fear. Maybe they had a chance to start over. But as Emily looked at Marcus and Sarah, she saw that they were both hesitant. They didn't trust Samantha, and Emily couldn't blame them. "What's in it for you?" Marcus asked, his eyes narrowed. Samantha's expression turned cold. "Let's just say I have my reasons," she said. "Reasons that don't concern you." As Emily looked at Samantha, she felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something about Samantha that didn't add up. Something that made Emily wonder if they were making a mistake by trusting her. But as they stood there, weighing their options, Emily knew that they had to make a decision. They could either trust Samantha and follow her to the safe zone, or they could strike out on their own and risk being caught by the gangs. As Emily looked at Marcus and Sarah, she knew that they were all thinking the same thing. They had to take a chance. They had to trust Samantha. "Okay," Emily said finally, her voice firm. "We'll trust you. We'll follow you to the safe zone." Samantha's expression turned cold, and for a moment, Emily thought she saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "Good," Samantha said finally. "Let's get moving." And with that, they set off, following Samantha through the deserted streets. Emily couldn't help but wonder what lay ahead. Would they find safety in the safe zone, or would they be walking into a trap? As they walked, Emily couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. She didn't know Samantha, and she didn't know if she could trust her. But as they turned a corner, Emily saw something that made her heart skip a beat. In the distance, she saw a large wall, surrounding a group of buildings. The wall was high and imposing, with barbed wire at the top. "What is that?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Samantha smiled. "That's the safe zone," she said. "It's a community of survivors, living together in safety." Emily's eyes widened as she stared at the wall. She had never seen anything like it before. As they approached the wall, Emily saw that there was a gate, guarded by two men with guns. They looked at Samantha, and then at Emily and her friends. "Who are they?" one of the guards asked Samantha. Samantha smiled. "They are friends," she said. "They're coming to join us." The guards looked at each other, and then back at Samantha. "Okay," one of them said. "They can come in." As they walked through the gate, Emily felt a sense of relief wash over her. They were safe. They had made it. But as they walked through the community, Emily saw that something was off. The people were all smiling and friendly, but there was something underneath the surface. Something that didn't feel right. "Where are we going?" Emily asked Samantha as they walked through the streets. Samantha smiled. "We're going to meet the leader of the community," she said. "He's the one who makes all the decisions." Emily's eyes narrowed. "What's his name?" she asked. Samantha's smile grew wider. "His name is Marcus," she said. Emily's heart skipped a beat. Marcus? That was the same name as her friend. As they approached a large building, Emily saw a figure standing outside. It was a man, with a cold, calculating look in his eyes. "Welcome," he said as they approached. "I'm Marcus. And you are?" Emily's eyes narrowed as she looked at Marcus. There was something about him that didn't feel right. Something that made her skin crawl. "I'm Emily," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "And these are my friends, Marcus and Sarah." The Marcus standing in front of her smiled, but it was a cold, calculating smile. "Welcome, Emily," he said. "I've been expecting you." Emily's heart skipped a beat. Expecting her? How did he know she was coming? As they followed Marcus into the building, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The building was luxurious, with marble floors and crystal chandeliers. But it felt empty, like there was no one really living there. As they walked, Marcus told them about the community. He explained that they were a group of survivors, living together in safety. But as Emily listened, she couldn't help but feel like there was more to the story. They eventually arrived at a large conference room, where a group of people were waiting for them. They were all smiling and friendly, but Emily could sense an underlying tension. As they sat down, Marcus began to explain the rules of the community. He told them that they would have to work together, sharing their skills and resources. But as Emily listened, she couldn't help but feel like they were being trapped. And then, just as she was starting to feel like she couldn't take it anymore, Emily saw something that made her blood run cold. On the wall, behind Marcus, was a large screen. And on the screen was a picture of her parents. Emily's heart skipped a beat. How did they have a picture of her parents? And what did it mean? As she looked at Marcus, Emily saw a cold, calculating glint in his eye. And she knew, in that moment, that she was in grave danger. Emily's eyes were fixed on the screen, her mind racing with questions. How did they have a picture of her parents? What did it mean? Marcus smiled, as if he knew exactly what Emily was thinking. "We've been looking for you, Emily," he said. "We've been looking for all of you." Emily's heart was pounding in her chest. What did Marcus mean? What did he want from them? As she looked at Marcus, Emily saw something in his eyes that made her blood run cold. It was a glint of obsession, of fixation. "You see, Emily," Marcus said, his voice low and menacing. "We've been watching you. We've been watching all of you. And we know exactly what you're capable of." Emily's eyes narrowed. What did Marcus mean? What did he know about them? As she looked at Marcus, Emily saw something that made her heart skip a beat. On his wrist, Marcus was wearing a small, silver watch. And on the watch was a symbol that Emily recognized. It was the symbol of the organization that had killed her parents. Emily's eyes locked onto Marcus, her mind racing with anger and fear. She knew, in that moment, that Marcus was not what he seemed. He was not a survivor, trying to make a new life. He was something much more sinister. And Emily knew that she had to get out of there, before it was too late. Emily's heart was racing as she looked at Marcus. She knew that she had to get out of there, but she also knew that it wouldn't be easy. Marcus was smiling at her, a cold, calculating smile. "You're very clever, Emily," he said. "I'll give you that. But you're not clever enough." Emily's eyes narrowed. What did Marcus mean? What did he have planned for her? As she looked around the room, Emily saw that the others were all staring at her. They seemed to be waiting for something, but Emily didn't know what. And then, without warning, Marcus stood up. "It's time," he said, his voice cold and menacing. The others stood up, too, and Emily saw that they were all surrounding her. She was trapped. As Marcus began to walk towards her, Emily knew that she had to act fast. She looked around the room, desperate for a way out. And then, she saw it. A small window, high up on the wall. It was her only chance. With a surge of adrenaline, Emily made a run for the window. She climbed up onto a chair, and then onto a table, and finally, she reached the window. As she pulled herself up, Emily felt a hand grab her ankle. She looked down, and saw Marcus staring up at her, his eyes blazing with anger. "You're not going anywhere," he snarled. But Emily was determined. She kicked out at Marcus, and managed to shake him off. And then, she pulled herself up, and climbed out of the window. As she dropped down to the ground, Emily felt a rush of excitement. She had escaped. But as she looked around, Emily realized that she was not alone. There were others out there, watching her. And Emily knew that she was far from safe. As Emily looked around, she saw that she was in a deserted alleyway. The buildings around her were tall and imposing, casting long shadows in the fading light. She knew that she had to keep moving. Marcus and his followers would be looking for her, and she didn't have much time. Emily started to run, her feet pounding the pavement as she sprinted down the alleyway. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew that she had to get away. As she ran, Emily heard footsteps behind her. She didn't dare look back, fearing what she might see. Instead, she kept her eyes fixed on the path ahead, her heart pounding in her chest. She was running out of breath, but she didn't dare stop. Just when Emily thought that she couldn't run anymore, she saw a glimmer of light up ahead. It was a street light, casting a warm glow over the pavement. Emily burst out of the alleyway, gasping for breath as she emerged into the bright light. She looked around, trying to get her bearings. And then, she saw him, a figure standing on the corner, watching her. It was a boy about her age, with piercing blue eyes and a messy mop of hair. He smiled at Emily, and she felt a surge of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she had found a friend. "Hey," the boy said, walking towards her. "Are you okay? You look like you've been running for your life." Emily smiled, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. "I have," she said. "My name is Emily." The boy smiled back. "I'm Max," he said, "and I think I can help you." As Emily looked at Max, she felt a sense of hope that she hadn't felt in weeks. Maybe, just maybe, she had found a way out of this nightmare. But as she looked into Max's eyes, Emily saw something that made her heart skip a beat. A flicker of uncertainty, a hint of secrets untold. And Emily knew that she couldn't trust Max, not yet. She had to be careful, had to keep her guard up. As they walked together, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into another trap. But she had no choice. She had to keep moving, had to keep fighting. And so, with Max by her side, Emily set off into the unknown, ready to face whatever dangers lay ahead. As they walked, Max told Emily about himself. He had grown up in the city, and had managed to survive the initial outbreak by hiding in an abandoned building. He had been on his own ever since, scavenging for food and supplies, and trying to avoid the gangs. Emily listened intently, trying to get a sense of whether or not she could trust Maximum. He seemed nice enough, but she had been burned before. As they turned a corner, Max stopped suddenly, his eyes fixed on something ahead. Emily followed his gaze, and saw a group of people huddled together, talking in hushed tones. "What's going on?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Max hesitated, his eyes darting back and forth. "I don't know," he said finally, "but I don't like it. Let's get out of here." As they turned to leave, Emily saw one of the people in the group look up, his eyes locking onto hers. It was a man with a scar above his eyebrow, and a cruel smile spreading across his face. Emily's heart skipped a beat as the man started to walk towards her, his eyes fixed on hers with an unnerving intensity. "Max," Emily whispered, her voice trembling with fear. "I think we should get out of here. Now." Max nodded, his eyes darting back and forth. "Yeah," he said. "Let's go." As they turned to run, Emily heard the man's voice behind her, his words echoing off the buildings. "You can't escape me," he shouted. "I'll always find you." Emily's heart was racing as she ran, her feet pounding the pavement. She didn't dare look back, fearing what she might see. As they turned a corner, Max grabbed Emily's arm, pulling her into a narrow alleyway. "Wait," he whispered, his eyes locked on hers. "Do you hear that?" Emily listened, her ears straining to pick up any sound. And then, she heard it. The sound of footsteps, echoing off the buildings. They were being followed.